Mic check 1 2 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and it's Thursday. The weekend is one day away, and I am super excited. I always love when the weekend comes around, especially when I have a relatively clear weekend because it means I can do a little bit of traveling. Maybe not out of the country, but maybe some road trips. And whenever I think about road trips, of course, I'm thinking about handhelds. And this summer, the handheld game for me is going to be pretty interesting because, whenever you're on a long car drive, yes, you want to have a good amount of video games at your fingertips that you can play. But then you also want to be able to take advantage of other forms of media. And, the different handhelds that I have in my collection kind of do different things. And depending on the mood that I'm in, is really going to determine which handheld I grab when I'm heading out the door. Now, of course, you have something a little bit more nostalgic and one-dimensional like the Neo Geo Pocket, which I love that console because when you think about playing a handheld for a long period of time, you also have to think about like comfortability. And all of these different handhelds, and these aren't all the handhelds that I have in my collection, but all of the different handhelds that I have in my collection all present different challenges depending on the types of games that I'm playing. If I'm playing just a slow-paced RPG, any one of these handhelds will work. But then things become a little bit more difficult if I'm playing an action game like a Metal Slug or a fighting game like Marvel versus Capcom or anything of that nature. And so that's when the overall feel becomes a little bit more pertinent, I guess. Now, for me, I would say that I have medium to large size hands. And for me, I used to think that the Neo Geo Pocket was a great selection, and I used to think that it worked well. But as I've played through like Metal Slug Second Mission, I realized that it's a little bit more of a challenge. So when you think about comfortability, it's probably not the best, but I do love the nostalgia factor that I get from playing a console like the Neo Geo. And not just the Neo Geo, but I have others, right? So you also have things like the original Game Boy. That's a nostalgia play. If I really want to get into it, then I can also go with the Game Boy Color. That's also a nostalgia play. And then ultimately, you even have consoles for me like the Game Boy Advance, which, essentially is probably one of the more comfortable handhelds that I have in my collection. And the advantage that I have with a system like the Game Boy Advanced, and pardon me, I'm just going to take a quick sip of this coffee here. But one of the advantages that I have with something like the Game Boy Advance is that I actually have a lot of Game Boy Advance games. And that's another factor in selecting which handheld I'm going to go with, right? Because if I go with the Neo Geo Pocket, then I'm pretty much just subject to something like Metal Slug Second Mission. But if I go with the Game Boy Advance, I have a whole host of games that I could choose from, including Drill Dozer, plus another 30 Game Boy Advance games that I have loose cart in my collection. Now, granted, I can still play all of those Game Boy Advance games on a console like I like the Analog Pocket. Now, this is really more so the go-to. Like if I was gonna go Game Boy, Game Boy Color, or Game Boy Advance, then I'm more than likely gonna just go with the Neo Geo Pocket for two reasons. One, I don't have to worry about batteries dying, right? I can charge this in my car. Way better battery life, way better screen, and just all around just a better gameplay experience, but no nostalgia factor, right? And nostalgia does count for something. So the Analog Pocket does come into play when I start thinking about, just modern ease of use, right? I won't have to struggle trying to see the screen the way I would here with the original Game Boy or the Game Boy Color. Now, that's cool and everything when you're thinking about Game Boy games, Game Boy Advance games, more the pixelated, 2D sprite-based games. That's where I think this kind of wins the arena. But when you start getting into more mature games, more graphically challenging games, that's where things like the PS Vita and the PSP come into play. Now, for me, when I think about the PSP, I think about playing games that are at the PlayStation 2 level because that's the graphics that you get on a PSP. And the thing about the PSP is that there's still a certain level of nostalgia factor here on the PSP for me, because it is older, obviously, than the PS Vita, and the games that are around for it take me back to that early 2000s, like 2000, 2001 era of games where, we started to see, titles and, different franchises that kind of just changed the way, we play and view video games. But the Vita to me is a perfect combination of nostalgia and modern gameplay, because it's modern enough for me to take advantage of games that are as recent as just a few years ago, um, but still travel back in time, right? Especially when you think about the games that I've been able to download, original PlayStation 1 games that I have downloaded on here. And then you have the multimedia factor with both of these consoles, right? So when it comes to the PSP, for sure, I can bring any of my UMDs and watch movies. I can't remember if you're able to download movies onto the Vita. I think you can, but someone confirmed that for me in the comments. Let me know if that's true. But the multimedia factor with being able to watch shows and movies, to me, I would take both of these up to a whole new level. Now, you might say, hey, Y2K, does that really matter? Because if you really want to watch movies or TV shows, you can just watch them on your phone. And to that, I would say, you know what? You're right. If you're comparing my phone to the PSP screen, I'm probably better off just watching a movie on my phone, because the PSP, it has those, I forgot what it's, I don't think it's called aliasing, but it has those lines that kind of make the movies that you play on this kind of more, just have a more of an old school feel. Whereas with the Vita, especially if you have the OLED model, it's a much bigger screen, it's a much brighter screen, and I would much rather watch a movie on like my PS Vita than I would on my cell phone. So, of course, these are all first world problems. If you're sitting here trying to debate which handheld you should take with you on the go, I think it just depends on knowing what it is you want to play and do while you're on the road. One of the best things for me is either taking one or two RPGs that are going to take me a long time to play through. That's one way that you can just kind of narrow in on one handheld and just kind of lock in on one RPG, or even one adventure game. Like if there's an action adventure game that you want to play through, it's great for you to take one of those on the road. I don't think road trips are made for like those short paced, run and gun type games, those action games, because you want to kind of get a game that you can lock into and get lost in for that time that you're traveling, whether it's on a plane or whether it's in a car. Regardless of what you're doing, these are all, really cool options. Game Boy Advance games tend to be shorter, unless they're like an RPG, but you've got some really great options when you start thinking about the Vita and the PSP. But I'm interested to know what you all think. Like I said, the weekend's coming up. I don't know what your weekend plans are. Any road trips? Now is like vacation season. The school year is getting ready to end, so everybody's planning their trips to the Bahamas and Jamaica and Dubai and Hawaii. And let me know if you have anything coming up on the horizon and what your top handheld picks would be when you're out and about. It's the Y2K Collector with an early morning video for you. Hopefully you're having a good week. I will see you this afternoon. Take it easy.